This is House Planning Help episode 144. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, I have three guests who wanted to self-build but didn't. I'm going to find out what did they do next. And as this episode has a land theme, it seems only fitting that I should share another land story with you, my latest viewing, in fact, my first of my 40s. And this was quite away from our search zone, probably an hour's drive, although most of that was twisty, winding lanes. If you drew a straight line, I'm sure you'd be there in no time. So it was a rundown bungalow, beautiful old village, a couple of miles away, lots of thatch, tick there, rural location, an acre of land, good price. And when we got to site, there's that little excitement in your tummy thinking, this could work. This is an overgrown plot. We can see through that rundown property, but it's peaceful here. And as we started to walk around, I just heard this little rumble, which got louder and louder and louder. And then a plane went right over the top, really low. The loudest rumble that I have heard for some time. I thought, hold on, is this just a one-off, or are we going to have this again? Sure enough, 5 minutes later, the same thing happened. And then the same thing happened again. And I'm not even quite sure how, because I have this line where I know where the airports are. We're pretty much where we live at the moment are in between the two airports. So they're very high when they're going over our town. I'm aware as you get close to the airports, obviously you're more at risk. And I thought we'd cross this line and that we'd be nowhere near any planes, yet completely wrong. And it reminds me of visiting one of my friends who got a house before anyone else. And I was jealous. We turned up to the housewarming and saw how big it was and all the rest of it. And then suddenly the house shook. There was a train line right at the bottom of the garden. And the great thing is, I think when you live in these situations, perhaps you're not so aware because you didn't even flinch, whereas everyone was holding on to something so they didn't fall over. Anyway, that's still one of the challenges of looking for land to build a house where I live. And I will update you. Of course, it's a land episode today, so let's just get going. We've got three people to speak to. Corinne Mitchell, someone that I feel that I've got to know rather well over the last couple of years. So I'm looking forward to comparing notes. And I started this conversation just by trying to pinpoint when she decided that she wanted to build her own house.
Well, probably in the 2005 about, I started looking. We eventually found a plot at 2008 and put in an offer. And it was a horrible site. It had lots of problems, but I was desperate to build. So I put in an offer, and then things were getting a bit bad. I had electricity cable over the top, so we wouldn't be able to build until they moved that. And in the end, we just dropped out because it was just too much of a risk. And then a month later, everything crashed. So I was very pleased. And that's what put us off a little bit. So we dropped it for a few years. And plus, I don't think we'd have got the finances. So then 2013, at the very beginning, we saw the signs for Graven Hill, and that suddenly thought, wow, this is on our doorstep. We can do it. And we also had the finances then to be able to at least get the land. So it made it easier. So that's when we really started going for it.
You've actually been doing this for longer than I thought. I didn't realise that you had a first attempt.
Well, we did try. And I have to admit now, I was totally naive and didn't really have a clue what I was doing. But I'm happy to read books. I will quite happily research. So at least certainly the sort of budget side, I'd gone through all of that and that was pretty good. I'm very practical and I won't just say, oh, well, it'll be about this. I'll work it out, sort of. So we had a good idea what we could afford, what it was going to cost. But so we've been doing it for quite a while.
That's a challenge that I've found, that budget-wise, I've been on this sliding budget just because technically I can afford more. I don't want to. I came into this thinking I just want a really small build. And as I've moved along, I've struggled. So how did you set your budget and stick to it?
It's what we've got. We've got the money in the bank, a certain amount. I don't want to pay over that.
Borrowing?
We'd rather not. The idea being is we've got enough to buy the land, we'd then sell our house to then fund the house build, hopefully with a little bit left over at the end. So we're not going mad, we're not after grand designs, we just want a nice smallish house. I'd like a nice big garden, he'd like a nice big garage, workshop. The house, actually, we don't need much, so we're not going huge.
But yet you still haven't found what you wanted, so why?
I think the problem with the land, certainly around here, it is a bit more than I'd want to pay. And so sometimes I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to be a bit more realistic and up what we want to pay. And also what I have found is that if there's a plot of land which is big enough for 2 houses, a developer will go in and put 2 on, whereas we would just want that for just up 1 house to give us the garden, the workshop, garage, etc. So they're able to pay more than we could. And we've tried a couple on the seal bids. And of course,
I hate seal bids.
Not good, because you don't get feedback. You haven't got a clue whether you were anywhere close. They're very reluctant to tell you later on how much it went for.
You should try to, because I always go in on the education side saying, oh, you know, how are we ever going to get it right if we don't know? And you might,
sometimes you can persuade them to tell you.
Gently, yeah. I won't do anything other than education purposes
but
for this.
But we're finding land around here, it's just always going to seal bids. It's not fair on us, I don't think, but of course it does give the best price to the seller.
If only if it were more transparent. I'm sure there must be a better way of selling it that could still, because in an auction scenario, you might get to exactly the same price, but you know where you're going. And
yes.
I could, a couple of times when I've lost out on land, now, a few years down the road, I'm thinking, I should have put in more for that. So it's just weird. Yes. What do you feel that you've learnt over time as you've got your various bits of land and looked at them?
More of what to look for on the land. So instead of just taking, oh, that looks very nice, we'll be able to put a house on, I'm sort of far more critical of what there is around it, so like electricity poles, things that's going to affect the cost. So I'm far more aware of that side of it and what to be looking for. Which, of course, sometimes then thinks, okay, it looks really nice, but in actual fact, this is going to cost more to do, such and such. So we'll not bother. There was a recent one came, it was only 50,000, but it didn't have planning. Electricity poles would need moving. We'd looked at the history. It wasn't that brilliant. And in the end, we didn't go for it because it didn't sound like it would get planning. So you've got to have a bit more of an idea. So I think that's probably mostly failure is always teaching you something. So we're learning as we go.
Yeah, planning is an interesting one because as a first timer as well, it's a big risk to buy something without planning. I think if you're a developer and you have a real sense for an area too, it might be less of a risk. But it doesn't help us, does it?
No, and I'm not au fait with too much to do with planning. I would probably have to hire somebody to do that for me. I've tried looking into it and it just looks very complicated. So we would probably have to hire someone. But I think the way to do it, the way we see it happening now, would be to get in before anybody else hears about a plot. So it's word of mouth. Somebody thinks, well, I'm thinking of selling this part of land if you're interested, rather than going against everybody else. It's certainly how we got the house that we've recently bought to do up. It was word of mouth. A friend knew the person was selling and we were able to get in, no estate agents involved at all. And of course, I think we've got ourselves a bargain. And I think that's the way to do it. If you're going up against everybody else, you're going to end up spending more.
Before we get to why you gave up on land, how many different plots did you look at?
Oh, when?
Over time.
Oh, seriously, probably less than half a dozen, really. Once we'd heard about Graven Hill, I was quite happy just to go along with that. But then the more and more we found out about it, it's not going to be for us.
Why?
We want to get away from an estate. We live on an estate at the moment, very nice estate, but it's still houses surrounding us. We want to get away from that. We want to build a passive house. I've had a good look at the plans, and the design of the layout doesn't really suit passive house, because where we would want to build, i.e. on the edge, they tend to be north-facing gardens. And so it's putting a lot of extra work in to make a passive house. So... And also, we think it's going to just be a building site for the next 10, 15 years, and it's not really what we're after now. Mm-hmm. We want somewhere nice and quiet, build our own house, and then retire there quite happily.
I can understand that argument. I think the one thing if you wanted to build a passive house at Graven Hill, I'm sure you could almost talk them through it. There did seem a bit of flexibility when I spoke to the managing director, Philip Singleton, that nothing was set in stone there. They could accommodate different things. So I don't know, might be worth an explore, but I understand your situation in life. You just want a peaceful life, don't you?
Do.
Do you think we get too picky as self-builders, that we're almost looking for things that aren't here?
I don't think so.
particularly first-time self-builders?
Well, I suppose you have this ideal in your head. Finding that is very difficult. You have to compromise quite a lot. Even the site that we did think we'd had, there was a bit of compromise on that, as in it was still surrounded by houses, but it was a lovely outlook. So we thought we could cope with that.
What would you tell yourself just starting out? What advice would you give from where you stand now to going back in time that might have improved your chances either of finding something more quickly or of just finding better opportunities, speeding up the process?
Difficult one, that. I suppose you've got to spend time on it. You can't just do it as very casually, because it does take a lot of effort to find these things. It's like the estate agents. I've been at quite a lot of estate agents. You register your details and then you never hear anything from them. So unless you're prepared to then be ringing them every week or two, but that adds up, because every town has 5 or 6 estate agents, and we're looking at quite a big area, so we probably have about 20 estate agents to ring up. So I don't do it, and then I'll find that there was a plot that estate agents had, and we'd missed it. So you do need to really it's almost like a full-time job if you want to get something.
And actually looking at them too, even if it is just a drive-by, It's amazing that's taken a couple of hours.
Oh, definitely. Well, Google Earth does come in very handy. You can walk down the roads, have a look around, look at what's nearby. But when you get there, often it's a bit different to what you expect. So you've got to go and do the research, and you've got to go and have a good look, especially for the issues that might cost you money when you come to build.
How many pieces of land have you put bids in on, and have they all been sealed?
There was 2 sealed bids that we went for, and now we just don't want to go into any more sealed bids. And then we did think we had this plot of land at a place near here, so we haven't done anything since then. But to tell you the truth, there's not really been much come up. It's been very quiet. And the one that was 50,000, we didn't go in for that. There was another one which was very cheap, but it had an electricity pole again, which would need moving, and it was so small, the plot, that we just wouldn't go for it. So there's been a few there that we've discounted, but only the 2. That was last year, and probably the year before we had a sealed bid, but just didn't work.
Have you ever considered the location equation, that moving somewhere would find you an amazing piece of land?
Yes, my husband would love to move to Scotland. And there's lots of places. Are
you being serious?
He would. He'd move tomorrow, I think, because he loves the mountains. He loves his walking. But I don't particularly want to move there. I would rather stay here. We've got friends here. Our lives are in this area, so I'd rather not move. But the more we see and hear, I think we probably will end up moving, because we just don't want to pay. We could afford here, but I don't want to be paying that amount of money to get the land. So I think we probably will move.
Have you tried anything out of the ordinary to uncover a piece of land?
I wouldn't say out of the ordinary. We've done the usual. Well, I've done the usual things. I've put posters up, advertised in the parish magazines around the areas. We've emailed out to all our friends and everybody we know to let us know. And people do talk, oh, have you got anything? So they're all aware of the fact we are after this land. Contacted architects in the areas to ask if they know of anything. So no, I don't think anything out of the ordinary, but those are the things, certainly things which is on your podcast and on the hub. I was looking at it the other day and said, yes, done that. But there was, again, more, but it's like the estate agents, get into them. So I haven't done anything out of the ordinary.
That was sort of what I was getting at. It's really what you were going back to saying about work and having to just keep at it. So that brings me round to where you are now, and you've actually decided to buy somewhere to do up.
We did.
Why?
Well, I've got to give the husband something to do when he retires. And because we're not finding the land, we thought, well, this is actually going to give us quite a good experience, because although we've done up this house and we've done bits and pieces, we've done kitchens, bathrooms, all sorts, we've never actually done structural work. And this is quite a small terrace. We're taking our time. We've got people in to give us advice, but we hope that we'll just learn an awful lot that we can then put into the house build. The risk was that something would come up that we would want, and we've already spent the money on the house, but we'd get around that if need be. So I'm still looking, but until maybe next year, when we hopefully have done the house up, we can sell that, and then we'll be looking again seriously for land.
That's interesting. So you haven't finished. At one stage, I did wonder whether that was it. You were renovating and dream over. Good.
The dream's still there to build. And we're both keen to build, But if we can't find anything, then renovations will be the way we'll go, probably.
I do wonder as well, given my situation that I'm in a house that's way too small for me, whether I might have to do something similar. And I feel sometimes that we're on this path. I now have discovered that you've been doing this longer, but that we're sort of in sync. And so when I discovered that you were off to renovate, I got a bit upset about that.
No, I'm still keen to build, definitely. I've just bought a nice book on construction techniques. So that's my bedtime reading for the next few months. I'm happy to learn, and I will keep learning, researching, so that when we do get it, I think, we're in a good position to be able to do something.
Well, I wish you luck, and I hope at some point we'll catch up and you'll be showing me around your brand new house and be very, very proud to spend time in that quiet garden, and it won't cost you a fortune. Corinne, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
I think there's a lot of value in that chat, particularly if you're looking on the edge of a town or a city. So listen to it again. We covered plenty of ground, or check out our show notes. I'll give you the link address later. So what about people who work in the construction industry? Do they have these struggles, or is there an industry secret? Shall we find out? My next chat is with Nigel Banks. He's a director at Keepmo, and he leads on sustainability and innovation across their new build and retrofit business. First, Nigel reviews his hunt for land and desire to build.
I live in Leeds with my wife and 2 children, and we were looking for a suitable plot in a good location close to where we used to live, close to a local primary school my eldest son goes to. And we were looking for about 2 years. We looked at quite a range of different plots, far and wide to start with. Looked at quite a few agricultural buildings, which I thought I could convert into homes with the planning changes that were made a couple of years ago. But we looked at a few of those and thought they were probably too isolated, too far away from where we lived. We didn't want to be too isolated with our children. So we revised our sort of search criteria down to saying we needed to be within 2 miles of our primary school where my eldest son was going. So we came across around 2 or 3 sites which we thought were potentially viable. Not that just by looking on Google Maps, walking and cycling around the streets and sort of knowledge of the local area. And so a lot of searching, once we found some potential plots, searching online to find out who the landowners were and making contact. So one was owned by the Diocese of Leeds in a field just off some woods, again, quite close to where we lived. But when we spoke to the relevant people at the Diocese of Leeds, they said they already had plans for the site. We later found out they went into a planning application for 14 houses, and we had planned to put 1 house on it. It was subsequently... Yeah.
Well, that is certainly a struggle that I have come into, maybe not with 14, but looking at a plot and thinking, oh, that would be a nice house, and then finding someone wants to put 3 on it. So we're always up against that. Of these plots that you looked at, were there any that kept you coming back, wondering, putting in bids and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, that plot, I did try again and again with the landowner, saying, once I saw that the first planning approval had been rejected, tried to make contact again. But they weren't up for it. Really. Others, again, I got plans for other things. So again, one plot just around the corner from where we now live, we were looking to put 1 house, and they're going to put 6 flats and some offices and some basement car parking, where we looked to put 1 house and a little garden. So yeah, there certainly is challenges in finding suitable plots that were close to the area we were looking at, which is an existing fairly established urban area. We looked at somewhere we could knock down a single house, and perhaps build 2, because we couldn't afford to knock them down as they were and rebuild. But again, the one plot which we found, which had a suitable size of land, had a covenant on it preventing 2 houses from being built on the land. So that scuppered that plan as well.
Well, at least you found that one out early on.
Yes, no, absolutely. So yeah, we didn't get too far down the road. So we pretty much had given up pretty much about a year ago now, and having sort of been searching for 2 years, and I actually decided I would build a passive house office in my garden, sort of garden office type creation, and I started digging the foundations for that. When my wife came across a Victorian house which was in need of major renovation, so we ended up looking at that to consider we could come up to a fairly high energy standard, not quite passive house, but approaching that, and ended up buying that, and ended up having to backfill the footings I'd dug for the passive house office in the garden. And we moved in last June and are now in a retrofit property about half a mile from where we were living. So we've ended up with it getting there, but we've given up on trying to find a plot near the school where we're living, unfortunately.
How did that feel, moving on from the dream of building a house?
The dream is still there, and I'm pretty certain that at some point in my life, probably not for another 15, 20 years, we will build a new house. But for now, we're invested a huge amount of money and effort and time into this renovation, and we're fairly happy and settled where we are now. But that underlying desire and urge to build, I think, is still there, and certainly at some point we will no doubt do that.
Is there anything you would have done differently, could have done differently to secure a plot in the area that you wanted to be in?
I don't think in the area we could have pretty much trawled every bit of land that was probably big enough to put a house on within that sort of vicinity. There were a couple of bigger plots that if I had tried to set up a co-housing project, I mean, I'm aware of the Lilac scheme in Leeds, which is a great scheme. And if I could have tried to get sort of 10 or so or 20 or so like-minded people together, some of the bigger plots that were potentially available, which aren't too far away from where we live, could have been a solution. And I think if we hadn't found this place, that may have been the route I ended up going down, but that would have taken quite a long time and a lot of effort. I do think and so there aren't any housing plots for houses anywhere near where we are. There are certainly areas which could be turned into flats, which under the changed rules around custom build and self-build with local authority pressures, Leeds City Council, I think, will be looking to try and help people find land. But I think that trying to find that land in the most sort of attractive areas where we wanted to be would have been very difficult. And so we were sort of pretty restricted to looking at buying a plot and knocking it down, and therefore that requires quite a lot of cash. So you end up buying quite a reasonable house in the first place and knock it down to rebuild.
Well, thank you very much for telling us all about this story, and I can relate to this very easily.
Okay.
That is Nigel Banks. Interestingly, we're quite spread out geographically, yet the stories are similar. I know we're close to towns. We've been in Oxfordshire, Leeds just then, and we're finishing up in Devon. Rob Rickey, again in the trade, and I asked him why he wanted to build his own house.
We were living in a converted stable block in a stately home sort of situation, which was quite idyllic in some ways, but had difficulties with management company and neighbors. I also had done a course at Cardiff University in environmental design of buildings, which made me aware of the potential of low energy building. And I also, further on from that, did the Passive House Designer course with Warm Associates. So I was very keen to live in a very low energy house or a passive house. So that was my motivation. My wife's motivation was that she fancied living more out in the country, although we really wanted to stay within our postcode where all our friends were, our community, and so on. Our boys had all finished school and moved on, so we were also looking possibly to downsize, so that was another opportunity there.
In some respects, that's very similar to how I've approached it, that I am keen to stay in an area where I've got lots of friends. We don't want to be too far away and to have to start all over again. But I know where this story goes. So how many pieces of land for new builds did you look at over, I think you told me that it was a year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was about a year. I had a search bot picking up new listings and sending me emails. So I sort of had overlooked a few sites, but we only seriously looked at a handful because, again, we were looking in a very small area. We were only looking to move, a mile or two. One was a barn conversion, which had planning permission, but which was listed for about £300,000 with no services on site and a north-facing slope. It had all sorts of problems that we didn't want to engage in. The other one I looked at in the town of Crediton was a planning permission for 4 dwellings on a site. We thought about that as a way of funding our own house by building 4, selling or renting 3, and then living in the 4th one. But part of the problem with that site was that it was overlooking the school playing fields and tennis courts, and we thought it might not be the nicest, quietest neighborhood. So we only looked at 3 or 4 seriously.
So at what point did you decide this is silly wasting any more time? Because I've seen this happen, and I imagine actually it happens a lot. But when do you think, no, it's time to give up?
Well, part of our criteria was that the local authority was closing down the opportunities for barn conversions. And we saw the price for the one that did get planning permission and concluded that we really couldn't afford it, for one thing. And we'd better start looking for a house to retrofit.
Was that an easier task?
Yeah, well, lots of things came up. I saw dozens per week that were in the criteria we had, which is our postcode in a certain size and a certain price band.
Did you feel upset that you couldn't go down that other route, or are you someone who just moves on?
No, I wasn't. I was happy to look at this option. The other thing about it was that most of these houses were in town. And I thought for the long term, that was a better option anyway than living right out in the country. So my wife was more reluctant, but I was happy with the idea of finding a house in town.
How did your retrofit go? Are you pleased with the results? What would you say to someone who is perhaps at this point of thinking that they can't find the land, they're fed up, and they're now presented with this, well, do I buy another house or do I take on a renovation project?
One of my criteria was sort of economic sustainability. So we had a 4-bedroom house in a desirable setting, which had gained in value. And we found this house, which was about £100,000 less. And my concept was to spend that money, that difference in price, on the renovation, if we could. That was the goal anyway. But what we did first was looked at the house plan, and there were a number of problems with it in terms of orientation and circulation and all sorts. But we managed to reorganize the plan in one afternoon after we first saw the details, and then saw there was quite a bit of potential for this house, in fact. That was the first thing, to see, be a bit creative with the floor plan to see if it can be made to really suit your needs.
And finally, just in this completed project that you're in now, do you still have any desires to self-build one day?
Well, not particularly. The house was designed using passive house principles, but we didn't manage to achieve the airtightness requirement. And there were a couple of construction details which let down the passive house certification. But we have reduced our gas usage by 75%, and we're on break even with electricity usage with a bit of PV. So we've got a very nice garden here. We have planted a micro orchard in the front, so we have food and a lovely outlook. So I would have to have a really good reason, I think, to move on. But I'm designing houses for other people, so I still get that pleasure elsewhere.
Rob, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Ben.
3 different stories, some common themes. If you're disappointed with the opportunities on your step, maybe retrofit is the way to go. Particularly if it's just biding time, building up experience, it's a good idea. And I suppose at some point what I need to do is the flip side of this, showing all of the people that got their land really quickly, because I know I harp on about this because it's a challenge that I'm stuck with. Sorry about that. Have you been making notes if you're looking for lands? If not, don't worry, because we have. Just check out houseplanninghelp.com/144 for this episode. We've also got some photos of Rob and Nigel's retrofits that they've carried out. If you've got an observation, question, perhaps you want Rob or Nigel or even Corinne to follow up on it, just leave that at the bottom of the show notes and we'll see if we can get a response. houseplanninghelp.com/144. Let's finish up with a quick Hub update, and we've held our first progress call. We're going to do these quarterly. We may even up the frequency. It certainly felt like it was something that was beneficial to everyone, so that is great because it was only call number 1. The idea behind this, just to recap, to let you know what it's all about, is it's a place to get together, maybe share challenges, maybe even a place to vent if you need to, or tap into others' experience. They might be ahead of you. It's also very much about accountability, because sometimes it can just drag on and on. Trust me, I know. And you can get to know others on a similar journey. You are definitely not alone in this. So it's all part of Hub membership, including the case studies, the modules, the private forum. If you haven't checked out houseplanninghelp.com/join yet, I don't know why not. Maybe now is the time. houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, Bernard Tolkins from Tectonics Architects is my guest, and it's going to be a case study. We always enjoy the case studies. We're going to be hearing the story behind his award-winning urban passive house. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.